Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today we're going to be looking into something pretty huge, and honestly, it's kind of a story that's still unfolding in real time. We're talking about how the Trump administration's policies are kind of colliding head-on with the whole world of AI surveillance technologies.
It is a rapidly developing situation for sure, and one with incredibly high stakes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as always, we're here to help you make sense of it all. Cut through the noise and really understand what's going on without getting totally overwhelmed by all the details. That's the whole point of the deep dive, right?
Taking a deep dive, so
Yeah,
to speak.
exactly. And to do that, we've gathered a ton of really interesting material. There are policy memos from the White House, straight from the Office of Management and Budget. We've got executive orders from President Trump himself. And we're also going to be looking at some big-time AI investment initiatives and some really in-depth investigations into how government agencies are already using AI for surveillance.
It's quite a collection.
Yeah, it is. So basically what we're trying to do today is kind of pull out the most important information, connect the dots between all these different developments, and really help you understand the big picture. We're talking about major policy shifts, the sheer amount of money being invested in AI, and the potential ripple effects of the Trump administration's whole approach to this technology, especially when it comes to things like surveillance and like the future of how we're governed.
How power is wielded, right? It's a crucial question.
It is. It really is. Okay, so one of the things that really jumps out right away is this really deliberate and forceful push from the Trump administration to get AI integrated into basically every level of the federal government, like as fast as humanly possible. It's not just them sort of going along with the latest tech trend. It's a full-blown, proactive campaign.
Very much so. And it's all laid out really clearly, You see it in the executive order from January 23rd, and then again in those OMB memos, the M2521 and M2522. And what's interesting is that it's not just about making the government run more smoothly or whatever. There's this big emphasis on the U.S. staying on top, like being the global leader in AI.
Right. It's about competition, staying ahead of the game, especially when it comes to countries like China. Okay, so let's break this down a bit. You mentioned the executive order and those memos. I mean, they're pretty straightforward about what they want to achieve. It's all about adopting AI quickly, but they also say it has to be done responsibly. But then they also talk about getting rid of all the red tape, all those bureaucratic obstacles they think are holding things back. And yeah, like you said, a big part of it is about making sure the U.S. stays ahead of the curve globally when it comes to developing and actually using AI. It's about maintaining that edge, that competitive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And the language they use is really interesting. They even talk about reversing what they saw as the previous administration's approach, which they felt was too hesitant, too focused on the risks, and not enough on the potential benefits of moving quickly. And they've completely changed the role of what they call the agency chief AI officers. They're not just supposed to be like rule enforcers anymore. They're supposed to be these proactive change agents pushing for AI to be adopted within their own agencies. And their job description is pretty broad. They have to figure out how to use AI in low-risk situations, figure out how to manage the risks that do exist, and even advise their agencies on how to spend money on this stuff wisely. So it's a really big shift from just overseeing things to actually driving the adoption of AI.
So it's like instead of being the brakes, they're supposed to be the gas pedal.
That's a good way to put it.
And it sounds like they're really serious about keeping track of how all this is playing out. Agencies have to prepare these big assessments of how far they've come with adopting AI and what their tech needs will be down the line. And then there's this whole new category called high-impact AI tools. What's the thinking behind that label? What makes an AI tool high impact?
That's a really important point. It shows that even though they're pushing for fast and widespread adoption, they do realize that not all AI is created equal when it comes to how it might affect people's lives and rights. So these high-impact tools, the ones that are seen as having a bigger potential to impact safety and individual freedoms, are going to be watched more closely. It suggests a certain level of awareness that AI could have some downsides, even amidst all this excitement about integrating it quickly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, we want to move fast, but we also got to be extra careful with the technologies that could have the biggest consequences. And it seems like they're also trying to make it easier for agencies to actually get their hands on these AI tools and start using them. The memo talks about treating AI tools basically the same way as any other IT tool when it comes to buying them. That sounds like they're trying to cut through some of the bureaucratic delays that might have been there before.
Exactly. The goal is to make AI adoption more, normal. They want to integrate it into the systems they already have for buying things, instead of creating separate processes that might take longer. And they're very clear about wanting agencies to buy top-tier AI tools, and importantly, they want those tools to be American-made. This plays right into that bigger goal of keeping the U.S. in the lead when it comes to AI globally. It's about boosting American companies and the American AI industry, so you've got that economic angle as well.
Yeah, it's like a Buy American policy, but specifically for AI. And to help with that, they're even talking about setting up a shared online database, a place where all the government agencies can go to find information about AI tools and how to use them. It's like a central hub for all things AI in the government. And when you look at President Trump's own words in that executive order, it's really clear how ambitious they are. He says, flat out, that it's the policy of the United States to sustain and enhance America's global AI dominance. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement.
It really is. And this big push they're making on the policy side is clearly backed up by, well, a lot of money. The fact that they've got these major tech companies pledging to invest at least $500 billion in AI and data centers over the next 4 years is huge. It just goes to show how massive this technological shift really is.
Yeah, those are some eye-popping numbers. And then there's this whole Stargate project with big names like SoftBank, OpenAI, Oracle, and MGX putting up the money, plus big partnerships with Microsoft and NVIDIA. This tells you a lot about where things are headed. We're talking about $100 billion being spent right away, construction already starting in Texas. It really shows how urgently they want to build all this AI infrastructure.
It's hard to even wrap your head around the implications of something that big happening so fast.
It is. It really is.
And one thing that's particularly interesting is President Trump's direct involvement. He's not just letting this happen, he's actively pushing for it. He's even talked about using emergency declarations to speed things up. That shows you how high a priority this is for him. And he's been very clear that he wants this infrastructure to stay in the U.S. because of, the competition with China. He sees it as a vital issue for national security and for the economy.
Oh, yeah, totally. And it's not just talk. I mean, you had guys like Masayoshi Son from SoftBank, Sam Altman from OpenAI, and Larry Ellison from Oracle right there at the White House for this announcement. It really shows how closely the administration is working with these big tech companies. And you have to wonder how much influence that gives them when it comes to shaping how AI is developed and used, which is something the reports definitely bring up.
That's right. And it's kind of fascinating how all this AI stuff is directly tied to energy policy, too. All these AI-powered data centers are going to need a ton of electricity, way more than we're using now. And people are starting to ask some tough questions about whether the power grid can even handle that kind of increase in demand. Some officials at the state level are already worried about the strain this could put on energy resources.
It's like the digital world is running headfirst into the limits of the physical world. Remember when President Trump called for that energy emergency? He was talking about an inadequate and intermittent energy supply, and that really highlights the problem. And then you had Doug Burgum, who Trump was supposedly considering for the Interior Department, suggesting that clean coal could be part of the solution to meet the energy needs of this whole AI infrastructure. That's a pretty interesting and potentially controversial idea.
It certainly raises a lot of environmental questions and shows just how much energy this whole AI push is going to require. But let's shift gears a bit here. It's not just about building data centers and competing with China. This whole AI thing is also changing how government agencies are doing their work, especially when it comes to law enforcement and national security.
Yeah, and this is where a lot of people start to get a little uneasy. The report talks about how President Biden's executive order from 2023, the one about AI safety testing for developers, was revoked. That order was meant to apply to AI systems that could pose risks to national security, the economy, or public health. Getting rid of that order seems like it's removing a layer of oversight, a way to hold these developers accountable.
It definitely takes away a potential mechanism for outside scrutiny, and we're already starting to see how AI is being used more and more for government surveillance. The fact that they're relying so much on people's social media posts as part of DHS investigations is a prime example. They're using this stuff for cases involving national security, immigration, and even suspected gang activity. That's a pretty big deal, and it raises some serious questions about due process and whether people are being treated as innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. And what's really concerning is that we don't know a lot about the specific AI tools the government is using to collect and analyze all this data from social media. It's like a black box. That's why this investigation into those federal contracts with social media monitoring companies is so important. The fact that DHS has at least 4 contracts with companies like Fivecast, Penlink, Cobwebs Technologies, and Hooster, all of which are selling AI-powered surveillance tools well, it paints a pretty clear picture of a massive and rapidly growing AI surveillance apparatus.
And what's even more striking is the kind of AI they're offering. We're talking about tools that can scan through millions of social media posts almost instantly. AI chatbots that are designed to pull information from conversations, and tools that can analyze the sentiment and even the emotions behind what people are posting online. This is way beyond just searching for keywords. The government is trying to understand the feeling behind what people are saying online, not just the words themselves. That opens up a whole new level of interpretation and misinterpretation.
Right, because how do you even define what a feeling is in the context of an algorithm?
It's a really difficult question.
It is. And it's no surprise that experts on civil liberties and technology are getting really worried about all this. I mean, you've got legitimate concerns about the potential for more dragnet surveillance, a higher risk of people being falsely accused or arrested based on faulty AI analysis, and the whole issue of automation bias, where people tend to trust the technology even when it's wrong. These are all very real risks that we have to think about carefully.
Absolutely. Like Rachel Levinson-Waldman from the Brennan Center for Justice said, the older social media monitoring tools were kind of like fancy search engines. They were passively looking for specific words or phrases. But these new AI tools are taking on a much more active role. They could be helping to choose who gets put under surveillance or even making those decisions themselves instead of humans. That's a huge change in how surveillance works, and it has big implications for privacy and due process.
The report says that AI is moving beyond just finding information. It's starting to make predictions about what people are going to do or suggesting connections between people that nobody had noticed before. That's a big leap, and it's potentially a really dangerous one. And Kia Hamadanki from the ACLU is worried about AI basically automating the whole process of choosing targets for surveillance and maybe even starting surveillance without any real human oversight. That's a scary thought, and it raises some really fundamental questions about who's responsible and who's making sure things are done right.
It all comes back to that idea of automation bias. We've already seen cases where people were wrongly arrested because of facial recognition technology. And using AI for social media surveillance just makes that risk even bigger. It's like Chris Gilliard from the Critical Internet Studies Institute said, it could create a situation where someone is considered guilty or dangerous simply because the machine said so. That goes against the whole idea of due process and the presumption of innocence, which are supposed to be cornerstones of our legal system.
Right. And it's not just about the government watching ordinary people. There's also this shadowy group called DOGE, which stands for the Department of Government Efficiency. The report says they're led by Elon Musk, and they've been using AI to keep tabs on internal communications at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. They're supposedly looking for signs that people aren't loyal to Trump or to Musk himself. Like, if that's true, it's a really big deal. It could mean that government agencies are being spied on from the inside. It's like Big Brother, but inside the government itself.
It's a pretty extraordinary claim. The idea that EPA employees were warned about these AI programs scanning their emails and chats for anything that could be seen as hostile is really disturbing. It could easily create an atmosphere of fear and make people afraid to speak their minds. And when you look at DOGE's overall mission to cut through red tape and get rid of dissent, it seems like they might be using these advanced surveillance technologies for political reasons, which is a really big concern.
And the way they're supposedly doing all this is also raising some eyebrows. They're said to be using encrypted messaging apps like Signal, which are designed to make messages disappear without a trace. Legal experts are saying that could be a violation of federal record-keeping laws, and then there are reports that they're skipping the usual procedures for handling documents, working together on things in Google Docs without creating any paper trails. All of this makes it really hard to know what they're doing and who's accountable for their actions. It's like they're operating in the shadows.
It is. And when you hear that EPA employees were told to be careful what you say, what you type, and what you do, it really gives you a sense of how oppressive this kind of internal surveillance could be. And the reports that DOGE is restricting access to important government systems and data, like locking civil servants out of platforms with sensitive personnel information at the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, point to a concerning centralization of control over information. It's like they're trying to control the flow of information within the government itself.
And then you have this ethics group, CRUW, filing a lawsuit, and a judge ordering DOGE to release their internal records. But according to reports, they haven't done it yet. It just adds to this feeling that DOGE is operating outside the normal rules and that there's no real accountability for what they're doing.
Exactly. It almost feels like a parallel government structure operating within the executive branch, but without any real transparency or oversight.
Right. And this brings us to what some analysts are calling a new architecture of control, which is a pretty chilling term when you think about it. It's not about some sudden power grab. It's more like a slow and steady process of weaving these advanced AI technologies into the very fabric of government. They're doing it through policy memos, huge flows of data, and these sophisticated machine learning models. And the idea behind it all is something called algorithmic preemption. It's a pretty key concept. It means that AI systems aren't just reacting to things that are happening. They're trying to predict what's going to happen and take action before it even happens based on the patterns they've found in the data. That raises some huge questions about due process and whether it's fair to intervene in people's lives based on what an algorithm thinks might happen rather than actual evidence.
That's a really important point.
It is. And when the report calls that executive order 14179 and those OMB memos, M2521 and M2522, a blueprint for an unaccountable AI-powered bureaucracy, it's hard not to feel uneasy. And they highlight three really worrying things. First, there's this normalization of widespread AI surveillance, especially in agencies like the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and the Justice Department. And there's no requirement for independent audits or any real transparency. Second, they're rapidly developing autonomous military decision-making systems, basically machines that can make decisions about warfare without much human oversight. And third, there are reports that they're using AI to rank and target people, including protesters and dissidents, based on data that could be incomplete, inaccurate, or biased.
And what's really important to understand is that this isn't some futuristic scenario. They're saying this is happening right now. These changes are being written into law and put into practice through these complicated bureaucratic processes. And a lot of it is hidden behind all this technical language that most people don't really understand.
It's like they're using the complexity of the technology to shield it from public scrutiny.
In a way, yeah.
And the fact that systems related to national security are often exempt from transparency and oversight requirements is a big loophole. It basically means they can deploy powerful technologies like facial recognition, social media scanning tools, and license plate readers without having to tell the public about any risks or get any real independent oversight.
That's right. And then you've got agencies like ICE and CBP, Customs and Border Protection, using these powerful data analysis platforms like Palantir's Falcon and image recognition technologies like Amazon Recognition. But they don't have to tell anyone what they're finding, how often they're making mistakes, or whether certain groups of people are being unfairly targeted. From a civil liberties perspective, that's a huge problem.
And it's not just the feds. It's very likely that these high-tech surveillance tools are going to end up in the hands of local police departments all over the country through federal grant programs, particularly those aimed at DHS fusion centers and their state-level partners. That means we could see this kind of unchecked surveillance spreading to every corner of the country, and most people wouldn't even know about it.
Exactly. And it's also worrying that the federal government seems to be endorsing this idea of predictive policing by deploying these algorithmic systems that are supposed to predict crime. But the problem is, these algorithms are built on data that can be biased and opaque, which means we don't really know how they're making their predictions. And that could just reinforce existing patterns of discriminatory policing, hiding behind this idea that the technology is neutral and objective. But the biases are baked into the data itself.
Right, they're built into the system from the ground up. And when you look at how they're using AI for the military and national security, it gets even more alarming. Memo M2521 basically says there shouldn't be any civilian oversight of these systems. That means they could have a free hand to develop things like drone swarms, autonomous targeting systems, and systems that help make decisions on the battlefield, all with less and less human involvement. And there's no real transparency or accountability for what happens, including civilian casualties. It's a really scary prospect.
It is. And then you've got this potential scenario where the government could actually sell the AI models they've trained on battlefield surveillance data to domestic law enforcement agencies. That would completely blur the lines between military and domestic surveillance, which has always been a really important legal distinction. It's not hard to see how that could have a huge impact on civil liberties here in the U.S.
It's like the technology is creating this feedback loop between warfare and domestic surveillance. And maybe the most unsettling thing of all is the possibility that they could use AI to assign people a threat level based on their social media posts, who they associate with, or even if they go to protests. That kind of risk scoring could be used to target people without any real due process, and it's very likely that it would unfairly flag people from marginalized communities, Black people, immigrants, Muslims, and leftist activists. That's a huge threat to basic rights and freedoms.
It is. And the fact that they can launch pilot programs for these invasive technologies without any real external safeguards, just with approval from within the agency itself, shows how much they're prioritizing speed over accountability and transparency.
So you have these potentially biased systems being developed and deployed without much, if any, public input or oversight. And the report makes this really chilling comparison between all this AI-powered surveillance and the FBI's COINTELPRO program from back in the 60s and 70s. You know, the program that was used to spy on and disrupt civil rights leaders and activists. The idea that that kind of surveillance logic could be built into algorithms and then used against people today is a really scary thought. It's like we're repeating the mistakes of the past, but with more powerful technology.
The most dangerous thing isn't just the surveillance itself, it's the possibility of preemptive repression. That's where they use these algorithms to predict who might be a threat, and then take action against them before they've actually done anything wrong. And all of this can happen without due process, without any chance for people to challenge the system or defend themselves.
So it's like being punished for a crime you haven't even committed yet, all because an algorithm thinks you might do it someday.
It is a very slippery slope.
And when you look at all of this in the context of Project 2025, which has these goals of eliminating the so-called deep state, centralizing power in the executive branch, and even privatizing a lot of government data systems, it starts to look even more troubling. It's like they're laying the groundwork for a much more authoritarian form of government, where AI is used to control people and suppress dissent.
The fact that they're making it easier for agencies to buy AI tools while also giving them more power to conduct surveillance is a recipe for potential abuse. And the report uses a lot of examples from science fiction to illustrate what could happen. Minority Report, with its predictive policing, 1984, with its constant surveillance, Black Mirror, and Brave New World, where technology is used for control, Gattaca, where people are judged by their genes, RoboCop, where law enforcement is militarized, and this whole idea of control being disguised as efficiency. These stories used to be just fiction, but now they're starting to look more and more like real life.
Yeah, it's kind of freaky how much those dystopian scenarios are starting to resemble what's happening right now.
It is, and it shows how important it is to be aware of what's going on and to think critically about how these technologies are being used.
Right, because these tools are incredibly powerful, and they can be used for good or bad.
Exactly.
So just to recap, what we've seen here is a really strong push by the Trump administration to adopt AI as quickly as possible across the whole federal government, including for surveillance and national security. They're putting a ton of money into building the infrastructure, and they're making it easier for agencies to buy and use AI tools. But all of this is happening with very little oversight or accountability. And there are serious concerns that these technologies could be misused, especially when it comes to surveillance, and that they could pose a real threat to our basic freedoms. And as listeners of the Deep Dive, you know you're here to get to the bottom of complex issues. So we've tried to give you a clear and concise picture of what's happening, even though it's a very fluid and evolving situation.
It's definitely a lot to take in, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions.
There are. And this leads us to the big question we want to leave you with. Given how fast AI is being integrated into our government, and all the different opinions about what that means for all of us, what are the most important questions we should be asking as a society about the future of technology and how we're governed? And how do we make sure that things like transparency, accountability, and independent oversight are part of that future? We need to be really thoughtful about the potential consequences of all this, both good and bad, and how it could affect our individual liberties and the very foundations of our democracy. Because this isn't just about technology, it's about power and how it's used.
It's about who has the power, who controls the technology, and who ultimately benefits from it.
Exactly. So those are the questions we want to leave you with today. Thanks for diving deep with us.
As always, it's been a pleasure.